Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yeah? Okay, cool. Thank you so much for the invitation, and congratulations on the center. It's really exciting. It's very rare to see heterodoxy expanding, so it's really nice and exciting to see where this is going. So I'm going to talk about three things. What I think heterodox economics is, just very, very briefly, so we're on the same page. My journey into heterodoxy and also within heterodoxy. And also what I think heterodox economics should be, or what I would like heterodox economics to be. So what is heterodox economics? This is a big, controversial question, and I'm sure we have different definitions of it, all of us. I wrote a short paper on this with Carolina Alves as well, who's here in the audience, Heterodox Economics as a Positive Project. And just very briefly, how I see it is studying the economy in a way that includes considering how power relations determine economic outcomes. So here we're talking about power relations within social relations of production and reproduction, right? Not in the market. That's how the mainstream understands power. And then heterodox economics then encompasses all the traditions that try to explain this, try to explain the system and its tendencies referring to these power relations. So you have Marxist traditions, which is where I find myself, post-Keynesian traditions, feminist, institutionalist, and many others that I won't try to mention all because then I'll leave someone out. So it's a big umbrella. It consists of a lot of different theories, but it doesn't apply, that doesn't imply that heterodox economics is anything that's not mainstream, right? So it is important, I think, to try to define, what are the positive strengths of heterodox economics, so that we can push those strengths forward. So my journey into and within heterodox economics. So I was usually attracted to the heterodox economics of the New School. That's where I went to do my PhD. After I studied development studies alongside mainstream economics for my undergrad and master's. And I was very dissatisfied with how economics was dealt with in development studies and in the mainstream, but I didn't know about heterodox economics. So I think this is a case for a lot of people that are studying undergrad, masters. It's hard actually to come across it. So of course, in my situation, I thought I needed to draw on sociology or geography to understand these economic questions and how they were relevant for the global South. So I come from my sort of personal background is I was interested in debt justice. I was a debt activist, and I was trying to understand, why structural adjustment programs didn't work, why financial inclusion wasn't working in the global South. And taking development economics modules just did not give the answers. So I randomly heard about the New School and heterodox economics in a lecture that I went to at LSE where Robert Wade was teaching global political economy. And he just mentioned it very, in passing. He was doing a job interview at the New School, actually, in the economics department at that time. And he just mentioned it because he was missing the lecture the following week. And that's how I found out about it, and that's basically, why I'm here. A random mention, which led to a lot of Googling, reading, and then, PhD applications. So the centers like this, I think, raising awareness about heterodoxy can help people who want to ask, critical questions but actually don't know that heterodox economics exist, come into heterodoxy in a less random way. So that's great. And as probably everyone here, I do feel like I embody a kind of heterodoxy within the heterodoxy. And at the New School and in other heterodox spaces that I found myself in the beginning of the journey, I did find that there wasn't as much theorization from the South. Maybe that's changed now. But at that time, I did feel a bit isolated in trying to theorize from the South. One of my papers that came out of my PhD was on dependency theory, and the way I ended up defining dependency theory, I think, reflects some of my view of heterodoxy and how I embody heterodoxy, which is the question that we were asked to talk about. So in that paper, Beyond the Stereotype, I argue that dependency theory can be considered scholarship that takes the polarizing tendencies of capitalism as a starting point. So this goes against kind of this idea that capitalism evolves in an even manner and in the same way everywhere in the world. theorization from the South, including taking the particularities of the South seriously, recognizing the specific constraints economies in the South face, a focus on social relations of production in a global way, and also taking this historical approach to understanding how capitalism evolved in a way that actually impacted different economies differently with very particular consequences for the global South. So this stands in contrast to what Samer Amin, the Egyptian-French Marxist, referred to as Eurocentrism in the social sciences in his book from 1988. So very briefly what Eurocentrism is, just because I'm going to refer to it a little bit as I go on. So Eurocentrism is this view of capitalism as something that is like a rational, progressive, peaceful force that capitalism developed endogenously in Europe through, increased market interactions, hard work, technological improvements. These were like internal things that led England to develop. And these, internal dynamics can be reproduced everywhere in the world. So it's like universalizes a partial understanding of capitalism. Why is it partial? Well, because this view leaves out the violent nature of the development of capitalism that led to a change in social relations, or that came from a change in social relations. And also the ways in which capitalism was shaped by unequal power dynamics globally, right? It leaves out colonialism, it leaves out the transatlantic slave trade, it leaves out racialization. It leaves out imperialism, it leaves out our understanding of capitalism as a global system. So I've written a book on this with 3 co-authors, Devika Dutt, Caroline Alves again, and Serbi Kazar, called Decolonizing Economics. And it's coming out in May, so for those of you who are interested, you can look out for it. And we talk mostly about the economics discipline as the mainstream of the discipline, but we also have a chapter on heterodox economics. And we argue, that heterodox economics can be a way to challenge Eurocentrism. It can be a way to think differently and from the South. But there are also aspects of heterodoxy that do reproduce this Eurocentric, isolated, kind of nation-focused view of economics. So that's something I think we need to grapple with as well as heterodox economists. So that leads me to what I think heterodox economics should be and what I'd like it to be. So I have 6 points on this, but I won't go too much into all of them. But the first one is anti-disciplinarity, because I think the split into disciplines in late 1800s, early 1900s was devastating for political economy. It split the politics from the economics, and that we see that in the mainstream economics very clearly. And this is something that is crucial for heterodox economics to resist. Of course, we do study things related to the economy, but we shouldn't reduce our analysis to kind of only thinking in an economistic way. And I think the strength of heterodox approaches tends to be that we understand that theorization itself is political, and that the political and the economic can't be separated. Second is focus on global social relations. When we look at labor exploitation, take it as our starting point. We need to also situate it within a global understanding of capitalism. This means understanding it in relation to patriarchy, imperialism, colonialism, white supremacy, even when we're talking about things going on in the US. So I'm not talking here about just ways to understand the global South better. It's also about trying to understand the global North better. For example, so I'm from Norway, which is why I have this very complicated last name. Sorry about that. And I hear very often Norwegians love to say that capitalism works really well in Norway. We have found a way to make capitalism fair and good and rational because unions are strong and we have a very, very generous welfare state. So they reach this conclusion because they don't see that the form that capitalism takes in Norway it fundamentally depends on exploitation elsewhere. Labor exploitation for cheap goods, keeping the inflation rate low. Prabhat Patnaik has made this point many times. Export of oil to the rest of the world. It's also a part of the Norwegian model. We need mineral extraction, labor exploitation to create the Teslas, the Nissan Leafs that are all around Norway. Norway is like has the highest EV use per capita, and Norwegians consider themselves to be the greenest in the world. So thinking that this is a solely Norwegian form of capitalism that doesn't rely on violence, exploitation, and extraction globally leads Norwegians to believe that any country in the world can become like Norway, right? If they pursue the same kind of rational policies, support welfare state, strengthen unions. And you hear Norwegians say this a lot, and actually it's not just Norwegians, it's people, like as a Norwegian, I meet a lot of people across the world that talk about how, other countries need to become more like Scandinavia, and like what policies can, countries implement to become more like Scandinavia. So I think this is hugely delusional, and I think it's Eurocentric. And the key point here is to understand that like any economic process in the global north or the global south needs to move away from methodological nationalism. So methodological nationalism is when you kind of consider one country as the most relevant unit of analysis, and when you consider them as separate. So you think, oh, this country did this, it developed like that, and you ignore, all the other things that actually supported the development of that country. You still think that those policies can be implemented elsewhere, but you don't take into consideration the actual global dynamics that make that impossible for all countries to be Norway, right? So these are global problems that we see in the global north as well as the global south, so solutions also need to be global. That was my second point. So my third point, focus on power relations. I already talked about that. Theorizing in a non-Eurocentric way. I already talked about that as well. So the fifth and second to last point is, beyond these kind of blocks that have to do with theory and policy, as a community, we also shouldn't marginalize scholarship and scholars from the South, or scholars with identities that you might not see as much in economics, in our research, our teaching, and our academic and political activities. I think there are a huge amount of kind of structural forms of discrimination in heterodoxy as well as in the mainstream. So that's also something that we need to grapple with. I think things have gotten better since I was a PhD student. But there's a lot more work to do. And this is not just a question of justice. I mean, it is a question of justice, but it's also this exclusion of certain kinds of scholars and scholarship from certain places also makes us poorer as a community. Like, opening up and being more inclusive also makes us richer, better, less navel-gazing. So that's another important point. Finally, so as heterodox economists, and this speaks to what Clara and others were saying earlier as well, we should embody heterodoxy not just in our scholarship, but also in our praxis. And there has been a separation of academics from political action, political activity, and this is a part of the neoliberalization of the university. So building something heterodox also needs to try to break that down, and that's not something one individual academic can do on their own. That's something that we need institutional organizing to actually be able to achieve. So this is something that I think this center can contribute to. Thank you.